Well, luckily I have a relatively decent view out my window of my hotel room. Getting to see the mountains off in the distance is pretty cool, and that's a nice old style building there. You know, we've got some of the new stuff here, although this bit of eyesore, a whole reconstruction, new construction rather, but all these new buildings they're making, it's pretty nice stuff. And there's the arena over there. So yesterday was my first day here at SIGGraph. It was Saturday. Basically arrived early enough to see the town a little bit. Today I'm going to see a little bit more, and then to the conference center Sunday. Some of the stuff gets going as early as 12 noon, and that's what I'm shooting for.
Have a good day.
This is a do-it-yourself little device, a blinking device. And right here, it's being in production. Doing the soldering.
He doesn't like being on. He turns himself off.
And of course, who's doing the soldering? But Mark Florestan, local New York City 3 Studio Max user group member. And obviously, Mark is enjoying putting this together.
It's like a little lantern.
This is a chance for anybody to come along here and build all these different devices. And essentially get used to doing soldering and putting electronics together. Rather very interesting little setup. Here we are, day 2 at SIGGraph. Actually, day 2 in Vancouver for me, day 1 at SIGGraph. This is Sunday. There's a seaplane taking off. Again, here's the amazing scenery around Vancouver. And we've got interesting structures around the entire conference center. Here's all these kind of lighting structures, and a sculpture, and some interesting building structures. And there's my buddy over there, Mark Florestan from the New York City Max user group, and Lisa Erickson. And I thought this was also a very interesting sculpture. It looks something like Legos, but it's obviously supposed to be a killer whale, Shamu. Okay, that's it for now. Here I am, morning, second day at SIGGraph, third day in Vancouver. This is, as you can see, the YWCA, if you can see it. This is my hotel. Front entrance to my hotel. Kind of interesting. And it has a little coffee shop here at the hotel. And across the street from us, they're actually in the middle of building this incredible structure. Reminds me of the Coliseum because it's round and it has these huge supports. And if you can look carefully, I don't know if it can be seen, but there is this white kind of a cloth that gets pulled over. So you can have the whole thing open, or you can actually have it closed up, it looks like. So it looks like it's going to be one amazing structure. Hopefully later I will get a shot from above so I can look down upon it, which I can from the inside of the hotel.
NBA type stuff.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that.
I think I've only seen, I actually have not yet seen a booth that says no, you can't do it.
So this is called MoleBot. You are watching a kind of a mole under the table. And these red balls are metallic, or no, they're magnetic, so that they follow the MoleBot along. And the challenge is to get them into the green star in the middle. And the whole concept is exactly like the kind of push pin things. Well, sort of like the idea of the push pin that you can get in the store, put your hand against it, and the pins come out and show the shape.
No. Why didn't anyone tell me? My bad.
So that's MoleBot.
I've been trying to knock it over.
Telenoid, Tele-Presence Android for communications. It's this really odd looking kind of doll. And hopefully somebody's going to sit down there in a moment so I can get a little video of that doll in action. Even when this kind of a robotic doll is hanging out there. It's doing a little bit of motion, looking around. But it tends to do some kind of interaction with people who sit and play with it. Here's a young lady who works at the booth. She's showing how the thing works, and it actually does talk to you.
How much does it cost for something?
And it interacts with the people. It's very cute. I like it. Thank you. Student volunteer at this project, actually done by the MIT Media Lab. There's this interesting way of controlling through different, actually through gestures.
Can you see the screen there? So
And if we zoom into the screen here, it's giving us a little bit better idea of what's going on, because it's actually simulating that there's some sort of a surface.
So we put the Google map on top of the data from the Google map to be projected on top of the surface. So you can see a real-time 3D display
3D map
of the mountain.
How long have you been working on this?
In total, I think it's about 2 years. We developed several applications which focus on different parts of the technology. But
This is the Disney booth, and they have this kind of a driving simulation. But the point of this particular driving simulation is as you're running into things, as you're running into objects and walls, what happens is this chair has a special kind of padding in the back of the chair, and it's all electrically controlled, so that once the padding in the chair, whenever you hit things, it's going to be doing vibrations in your back to give you haptic feedback. So if you crash on the right side versus crashing on the left side, these vibrations will be on the right side versus the left side. I think it's a typical game controller. So it's rather interesting, although the downside is the vibrations actually feel almost like electrical impulses, so therefore it's actually rather disconcerting. But it's still an interesting concept. Cory Doctorow, keynote speaker, just gave everybody permission to record. So here we go.
Prefigured the talk, which is of course about copyright. If you know what I do, I go in and talk about copyright. And whenever we argue about copyright, we get bogged down in a kind of ridiculous copyright is good, copyright is bad, polarized debate. And of course that's very silly. After all copyright is a set of technical rules to manage the entertainment industry and its supply chains. And it makes perfect sense to have rules for a big complicated industry like that. And arguing about whether or not rules themselves are a bad idea is done. What we should be talking about is which rules we want. So everyone knows that taking away rules is always better, is a really silly rhetorical proposition, and it's a cheap debating trick to say that anyone who wants to reform the rules wants to abolish them. It's possible to say, I disagree with you, this roadway should be running at 120 kilometers an hour and not 90, without actually meaning I don't want to have a speed limit at all. At the same time, more rules are always better doesn't make sense. You may notice that your neighborhood has improved since they put a stop sign in every corner. It doesn't follow that it will improve again if they put a stop sign halfway between each of those standing stop signs. So here in the digital age, everything we do involves making copies. Millions and billions of copies. Collectively, the people in this room have probably made more mechanical copies than the entire human race had up to 1909 when the first non-literary copyrights were brought in the United States. Here in the digital age, we copy like we breathe. And so the stakes for getting the rules right on copyright have never been higher. So today I want to get beyond that copyright is good, copyright is bad argument and dig into some meatier questions like, what do we want copyright to do? And how do we make a copyright that does that? Let's start with something that everyone in this room I think will agree with. Copyright should serve as an incentive to creativity. A good copyright system results in more people making more creations. One of copyright's most important goals is to serve creators. Now, about 15 years ago, the world's government started looking at modernizing copyright for the digital age. Pretty much the first order of business was to ensure that the technology intended to prevent copying got some special protections in the law. So WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization, is the UN agency makes the world's most viral copyright treaties. I sometimes say they have the same relationship to bad copyright law that Mordor has to evil. But having served as a delegate to WIPO, I can tell you there are some very good people there who want to do good. And in 1996, they promulgated the WIPO Copyright Treaty that said that nations should adopt special protections for what WIPO calls technical protection measures, but you probably know them better as digital rights management, or in Canada recently they call them digital laws. And in 1998, this came to the US in law, in something called the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, DMCA, which you've no doubt heard about as one of the most notorious pieces of legislation of our century. And the DMCA didn't just do what WIPO's treaty demanded of it in respect to digital laws. It went further. It said that we won't just protect laws that are protecting copyright. We will protect the laws themselves, regardless of whether or not they prevent you from doing something that copyright will allow. That's a complicated idea. What does it mean? Well, it means that if you're a user of a creative work, you can have this dichotomy between users and creators, and I'll get to that in a bit. But if you're a user of a creative work, it meant that the stuff that the law had allowed you, that Congress had sat down and said users should get, was all of a sudden taken away from you. So even though the law might allow you to format shift or back up or time shift or quote for the purposes of criticism or discussion, if a digital law prevented you from doing that, you were no longer allowed to do that in the law, because breaking the law was legal, even if you wanted to break the law to do something that the law allowed. And of course, the most voracious consumers of information are creators. There's a reason that whenever you see an author's headshot, including this one here that they've got of me, the start of this talk, they're shot against the backdrop of a bookcase crammed with books. And you see filmmakers standing in front of large libraries of film or stills of film and so on. And that's because in order to create, you must use a lot of creative works. But for people who weren't, who were especially engaged in creation and publication, there was a secondary effect of this special protection under the law that was much subtler and much more drastic. It meant that DRM companies got more of a say over our works than we have. So for an example of that, look at the iTunes Store, which has mandatory DRM policies for video and audiobooks. If you're a video maker and audiobook maker and you want to sell your works through the iTunes Store, Apple requires you to add their DRM to it. It's not negotiable. So say you sell $1 million worth of audiobooks through Apple's audiobook channel, which is run by Audible. And between iTunes and Audible, that's 90% of the entire worldwide audiobook market, right in that channel. And you decide afterwards that you actually think you can get a better deal out of one of Apple's competitors. Some spunky new startup that's in the process of doing to iTunes what iTunes did to all those really lame music and video stores before they came along. So there's one problem. You can't grant your customers, your listeners, your readers, permission to break DRM from iTunes off of their audiobooks and bring them with them to the new platform. Neither can the publisher. The only entity that's allowed to authorize people to take works that were sold in Apple's store to a competitor's media management platform is Apple. And Apple historically has not been in the go ahead and break our DRM business. So that means that your fans either have to abandon you or maintain two separate, non-interoperable parallel libraries of your stuff and use different devices, different managers, and different systems together. So here you have three all-important entities in the copyright equation. Someone who wrote a book, a company that invested in making the audio edition and publishing it, and a company that contributed no creative labor whatsoever and made no investment in the book's production, but did take the step of adding DRM to it. So who gets the lion's share of copyright? Who gets to say, yes, you are allowed to copy this file made up of my precious, expensive to produce creative bits? It's not the creator. It's not the investor, it's the DRM provider. And of course, this is even worse for those of you who create episodic or series content like TV shows, where every penny your audience spends is a penny they'll have to forfeit to follow you to some competing platform. This isn't copyright as a friend of the creator, this is copyright as the friend of a DRM vendor. The funny thing is that it would be piss easy to write a version of the DMCA that made sure that creators got the lion's share of copyright. All you have to do is say it's illegal to break DRM unless you're doing so for a purpose that copyright allows. It's easy. want to make sure that it's illegal to break DRM to make illegal copies, then just write a law that says it's illegal to break DRM to do something illegal. Because otherwise, what you're saying is, whatever use your DRM locks up, illegal, legal, left, right, up or down, we will spend an infinite number of tax dollars making sure that no one ever breaks that law and no one ever makes those uses. So what company wouldn't take up the government on an offer like this? Now some companies have figured out how to do this like virtuosos, and Exhibit A is the Apple iOS ecosystem. I don't mean to pick on Apple, but they're very good at this. They're very good at most of the things that they do. So if you want to see how laws protecting DRM can go wrong, look at how Apple uses it with iOS. Apple uses DRM to make sure that only apps bought from Apple will run on iPhones, iTouches, and iPads. So even if you go ahead and write some code that's compatible with Apple's platform, you can't sell it or give it away to an iOS user unless Apple approves it and adds it to the App Store. And Apple, of course, gets to take their 30%. If Apple doesn't like your app, they won't sell it, and that's fair enough. I used to work in a bookstore. If I didn't like your book, I wouldn't sell it either. But it's against the law for anyone to open a competing store that users can visit if they don't like Apple's judgment. If Apple sells your app to me, and I want to hit my iOS device and run the same app inside a runtime on a competing platform like Android or whatever it is Nokia's doing this week, only Apple can give me permission to move your apps when I go. And only Apple can give me permission to run your code on my device. So every time someone buys into the iOS ecosystem and increases its footprint, it increases the need for software authors and interactive media creators to sell their wares there. But every time someone buys an app from Apple, it makes it more expensive for creators and audiences to move to competitors. And the more popular Apple has gotten, the worse the deal has gotten for creators. Now that Apple has established itself as the powerhouse distribution channel for interactive media, it's decided that you have to not only give them 30% of the purchase price of your apps, but 30% of every dollar that someone spends using your app even after the sale has been executed. Now, there has never in history been a time when tight controls over distribution were good for artists. Fewer labels always means worse deals for musicians. Fewer studios always means worse deals for people who work in the movies. Fewer publishers always means worse deals for authors. And it's no different with the distribution bottlenecks created by the DMCA and handed to tiny companies like Apple. Now, you might think that 15 years after the US got it so terribly wrong with the DMCA that other governments would be lining up to get it right. But you'd be wrong. There's a guy named James Moore. He's the Conservative Member of Parliament for Port Moody, Westwood, Port Coquitlam, which is only about 20 kilometers from here. He's the co-author of Bill C-32, introduced in Canada's last Parliament, to be Canada's version of the DMCA. And he made exactly and precisely the same mistake that the Americans made in 1998. Making a mistake about the way the digital copyright should work in 1998 is forgivable. It might have been hard to see way back then how things might go. But more than a decade later, with all the facts at hand about what happens with DMCA-like rules, it is inexcusable to repeat those mistakes. Certainly, we can't characterize it as an accident. Now, worst of all, many of Canada's creators and studios, labels, and publishers endorsed this bizarre proposal to give the meatiest part of Canada's copyright protection over to companies that made DRM, not creative works. It's a real throat-cutting business backing proposals like this. I mean, it's not as though DRM actually stopped.
Okay, it's Monday night, on the way to the SIGGraph chapters party. Well, I get a little bit of the how things look at night. That blue lit building. I think this up here is way cool with this glowing clock tower up there. I don't know if it's going to come out well in the video. And there's another purple lit on the building. Anyway, off to the Chapters Club party at the club.